All right, we'll go ahead and get started here in a few seconds. We'll just let individuals come in to the live webinar session here. You are in the Authentic Storytelling Through Architecture and Design, Hawaii style. Koati kai tawa haupa, dushinome kutu tuitsa kohayahano, eshte, shrashka washti, shtasa. Thank you for joining us for the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association's webinar series. Today's educational webinar is Authentic Storytelling Through Architecture and Design, Hawaii Style. My name is Bianca Mitchell and I am from the Pueblo of Acoma and I am AIANTA's Education Manager. For those of you who are not familiar with AIANTA, for nearly 2 decades, AIANTA has served as the national voice for American Indian nations engaged in cultural tourism. In addition to serving as the voice for Indian country tourism, AIANTA provides technical assistance and training to tribal nations and Native-owned enterprises engaged in tourism, hospitality, and recreation. AIANTA's mission is to define, introduce, grow, and sustain American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian tourism that honors traditions and values. AIANTA's educational offerings include this year's American Indian Tourism Conference, which will take place in person at the Wekopa Casino Resort on the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation in Scottsdale, Arizona, on October 25th through the 28th. Reimagine, reemerge, reunite, stronger together in Indian country is the theme of this year's conference, now celebrating its 23rd anniversary. We are still seeking speakers for the conference, so if you'd like, let us know. Visit our website at aianta.org to learn more about our educational program offerings and at aianta.org/AITC for additional information and registration for this year's 23rd Annual American Indian Tourism Conference. Additionally, as we all look forward to a renewed future, AIANTA has rolled out an interactive new town hall series hosted by our AIANTA Board President, Mr. Emerson Weil, and AIANTA CEO, Mrs. Sherry L. Rupert. They have begun to unveil our major initiatives for the coming year, and we would like to hear from you. Please join us for our next town hall meeting, Travelers to Indian Country and Native America Travel, on June 30th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. This second session will hold an open dialogue about our consumer travel site, Native America Travel. I encourage all hospitality industry professionals to attend. Again, learn more at our website, aianta.org. Thank you for joining us today. Our webinar is the Authentic Storytelling Through Architecture and Design, Hawaii Style. I am pleased to announce or introduce you to our webinar moderator for today, Hiʻilani Shibata. As the lead culture trainer for the Native Hawaiian Hospitality Association, NaHHA, Hiʻilani Shibata has been sharing the essence of aloha with those who work in the visitor industry of Hawaii for more than 20 years. An educator, cultural consultant, and a practitioner of lomi lomi, healing through the manipulation of the body, Hiʻilani understands the importance of taking care of the place, and the Native culture is a foundation to a healthy hospitality industry. As one of the AIANTA Pacific Region board members, she would like to encourage those in the Pacific region to uplift their culture through authentic sharing with visitors, as the travel industry is a vehicle of peace around the world. And at this time, Hiʻilani Shibata. Thank you for being with us, Hiʻilani.
Aloha mai kako, mahalo Bianca. Thank you for such a beautiful introduction. I want to start our presentation off with an oli that we do as part of the Native Hawaiian Hospitality Association. It's a oli that was written with the intention that reinstates or reminds us all about how we are all lamaku, beacons of hospitality, no matter where we are, especially if we are native and in our homeland. Ea mai na lama kue ho o kipa, ke nana nei na opua o ka aina e. He loko mai ka ika manu o ka ona, ke au hokala e hiki mai ai. Ona ka e walu, ona kua hiwi, ona hao mako. E ola Hawai'i e, ola Hawai'i e, e ola Hawai'i e. So in this presentation, we are actually sharing our ha, our leo, our voice, our essence, and all of the aloha from our islands here in Hawaii. And so we're very excited, or I'm very excited, to have two amazing Native Hawaiian cultural practitioners, business leaders, community members that are going to be sharing their journey and all of their ike, their knowledge with us today. So first, I would like to introduce Mālia Kaʻaihue, who is a highly recognized entrepreneur and an award-winning author who is deeply involved in culture and community. She attended the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where she received a bachelor's degree in Hawaiian Studies and Language, as well as her master's and her doctoral degrees in political science. One of the coolest things about Malia is it's wonderful to watch her because over the last several years, Pacific Business News has recognized Malia as a woman to watch. In 2013, 40 under 40 class of 2016, an industry leader in 2017, top 25 women-owned businesses in 2019, and most recently, an awardee for Hawaii's fastest 50 in 2020. And in addition, Malia was featured on the cover of Hawaii Business Magazine's 20 for the Next 20 in 2019. And our our presenter, who is just I just have so much respect for him as well. And his name is Robert K Yopa, and he specializes, he's actually the chairman at Kalamai, excuse me, the chairman and the overall head guy for WCIT architecture. He's specializing in planning, entitlements, and design. Rob Iopa has honed his craft through years of experience with several noteworthy firms, including for the past 2 decades with his own WCIT architecture. Throughout his career, Rob has led and participated in the development of projects throughout Asia, South America, the South Pacific, and all of the major islands of Hawaii. Under Rob's leadership and direction, WCIT Architecture has grown from a startup group into one of the largest firms in the state with an impressive international clientele. Recognized as one of the top 50 fastest growing small businesses in the country, Hot 50, by Entrepreneur Magazine, as well as a member of the prestigious Inc. 5000 by Inc. Magazine, WCIT Architecture's growth has dramatically increased under his leadership. Rob was named one of Hawaii's brightest young leaders, 40 under 40 by Pacific Business News, one of the state's most influential leaders for the next 25 years, 25 for the next 25 by Hawaii Business Magazine, and has been named an SBA Business Person of the Year for the City and County of Honolulu. One of the most beautiful things is all three of us were born in Hilo on the island of Hawaii, right next to Kilauea volcano, which is still bubbling and going. And so I think all three of us have the fire of, of our islands to share with you today. So with that, I want to just get right into it because there's so much awesome storytelling and presentations. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Rob can start getting his the presentation up, and I will hand it over to Rob and Malia. Please, I remind everybody, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put it in the chat box. And I will monitor that, and we will definitely get to your questions at the end of the presentation. All right, here we go. Mahalo.
Mahalo Hiʻilani for that awesome introduction, and especially for the oli and blessing us with that leo to start off this presentation. Greatly appreciated and really grounding for all of us. Aloha kako. I'm excited to be here with you this morning with one of my mentors, Rob Iopa, who has been an incredible just Alakaiyan leader for me in my life and in my business career. And so I'm going to kick off the presentation this morning, but we're going to kind of volley back and forth because a lot of the work that we do actually comes from both of our firms, but we spent a lot of time in the beginning of our relationship really kind of consolidating our thinking around Hawaiian design and around how to bring Hawaiian storytelling into different places throughout Hawaii. So I'm going to get started and then we'll just be going back and forth, and we're happy to answer anybody's questions at the end too. So mahalo nui. We wanted to start off here at the Kumulipo because the Kumulipo is the cosmogonic genealogy of the Hawaiian people. It's where we start our lahui, our nation. Our nation is born here. So anytime that we have a project, we start here. We bring the project back to the very genesis of our land and our people. And in this beautiful picture by Solomon Enos, a Native Hawaiian artist, you see the pull of Wakea, Sky Father in the blue, and Earth Mother in the green. And their union really brought together the birth of the islands and the birth of the Hawaiian people. From this relationship, we know that the land was born, the Aina was born, which is land. Aina also means, the etymology of the word means that which feeds. So everything that feeds and nourishes us. And that's our elder sibling. And then our younger sibling was born, and that was Kanaka, or man. So we know that in any project, architecture, archaeology, anything that we're working on, our kuleana, our responsibility, our obligation is to bring man and land closer together. We do that by honoring the relationship of the elder sibling. And in that relationship, we know the land will care for us, will provide for us, will shelter us. And we as a younger sibling have a responsibility to honor the land and the people and to protect the land. So part of that cultural framework is really born in the cosmogonic genealogy of our people. And we know that if land cares for man, man cares for land. So all of the work that we do goes back to the land in which we are designing for.
Picking up from that notion of Aina and Kanaka, the connection of man and land, Hawaiian people had a land division known as the Ahupua'a. And there was no metes and bounds, there was no definition of parcels of land. There were these slivers that started at the top of our mountain peaks and went to the outer edges of our reef environments, our nearshore reef environments. Within each one of these ahupua'a, you would find all that was necessary to sustain life. If my ahupua'a was rich in fish and yours was rich in taro or kalo, that we would have the opportunity in these ahupua'a to trade and to sustain ourselves through our lifestyles. In contemporary society, ahupua'a in planning has sometimes become cliche, unfortunately, and oftentimes just represents the idea of sustainability or natural resource management. In our practice, we've looked to dive a little further to recognize that environmental stewardship and sustainability is a critical element of the ahupua'a. But there is also a social political aspect, an economic aspect, and a cultural sensitivity and awareness that was practiced on a regular basis. Our practice really looks to take these principles and put this into play in contemporary society. We frame this kind of thinking in what we call tomorrow's ahupua'a, guided by a proverb, a Hawaiian proverb, very similar, I know, to many indigenous people, the idea to respect your past, to know where you're going, you need to know where you're coming from. So we literally try to overlay the ideas of our ancestors, contemporary and ancient, in our practice to help guide where we go in the future.
In order to do this, we knew that we needed a methodology, an approach, if you will, that we could take as part of our services and bring to clients. One that would honor our genealogy, one that would honor the land in which we were designing for, and one that would honor the people. And it's not something that is static or in the past, but something that would bring our culture forward through the generations. And so really thinking about how do we engage 10 generations back before us and 10 generations in front of us. So both of our ancestors and then all of the generations to come. And when we design for space, we think in that sense, we think generationally. So although we're solving for many contemporary issues of today, we're actually solving for our grandchildren's grandchildren. What kind of spaces can we build that will allow them to see themselves reflected in that space for generations to come as Hawaii is ever shifting and changing? And the approach that we've created is the mo'o methodology. And mo'o means a lot of things in our culture and our language, but one of the things that it means is succession. So this idea of succession, that we are all on a continuum and all connected. And just as we are having the responsibility and privilege of planning for this space and this maybe hotel, maybe cultural resource center at this given point in time, somebody else had that kuleana generations before us, and there will be somebody that'll come generations after us. So the mo'o methodology is really how to tie in the succession of all of these generations together to produce something that brings Aina and Kanaka, land and man, closer together.
This methodology really came together as we were crafting a children's book. It was kind of something that just happened. We had never intended necessarily to write a book. But over the course of time, I had personally, with my family, started to think about the creation of a home on these ancient and sacred ponds in our island of Hilo. And I was using ancient stories, contemporary stories, ideas to generate form that turned into this book called Ama Nui. Ama is a crab, a little rock crab that runs along the shoreline. And this idea was of this great warrior chieftain who would manage and take care of these sacred ponds. It evolved, right? Lots of our philosophy and way of thinking evolved, but this idea of the mo'o and the methodology evolved from the storytelling. We first started to look at some history.
So when we engage the mo'o methodology, we start off always with mo'o ku'auhau. And mo'o ku'auhau means genealogy. We love genealogy just as you probably love genealogy as Indigenous people, because it really was our way of organizing space and time. So in time and continuum, we knew space and time through genealogy. And so genealogy can manifest in many ways, right? We each have a personal genealogy, institutions have a genealogy, and many of our genealogies for the Hawaiian people were recorded in mele songs and in oli chants. And so this was a chant that was introduced to us upon taking on the responsibility to write this children's book. And it's Napana Kaulana o Keokaha. It's the famous places of Keokaha, written by one of our most renowned scholars, Auntie Edith Kanakaʻole, who is also from Hilo. And it takes you through all the bays of Keokaha, this area in which we were thinking about this home where Rob's ohana is from. And she actually points out all the different place names of Keokaha and talks about every place name. This then becomes the backbone, if you will, for the story Ama Nui. This is kind of a fun, this was a glossary of the children's book. And when we were thinking of about how to lay out the glossary, right, you have your typical kind of very literal, both through language, but also just laid out very, constructed very, what's the word, laterally. But we wanted our glossary to be engaging for children. We wanted it to represent the land in which we were talking about. We wanted the nature of the animals and the story to come alive in the glossary. So what we were able to do with our good friend and amazing illustrator and architect at WCIT Architecture, Danny Kanekuni, was to do these 3 images, which really kind of summarize all the words. And then we put the words, place the words in the glossary around each of the images in the picture. And this is an important way that as we design, whether we're designing a story, whether we're designing a book, a building, that we continue to disrupt mainstream spaces. Part of our kuleana as Indigenous people is to continue to disrupt what people have come to know to be ike and knowledge. So, in laying out the glossary, it might seem simple. It's just a glossary. In this way, we're actually writing this, building this, designing this for the minds of Indigenous children, so that it is something familiar to them, so that they're able to take away the ike and the knowledge that they need from it, and doing it in a way that we own, that we have agency in.
As the book kind of trails through, the structure of the book looked for children interesting type illustrations on one side. There's a rather simple kind of story of mo'olelo that gets told on how excess and want and desire should be curbed for what is right and pono and sustainable. But as we do that, in the footer of the book, you see these architectural diagrams, with the thinking being that the illustration, the story, the glossary, and these architectural diagrams can start to tell a story that children, and quite frankly, adults alike, can learn from, right? And how our stories, how our principles, how our thinking can lead into design. And then ultimately, we show them what the design looks like. So our 2 kind of heroes in the story are 2 turtles, or 2 honu, that go and help the crab find his eye so that he can protect the sacred bays. And the form and structure of the home is guided by the form and structure of the crab. Simple stories and illustrations, but showing people how our thinking, our genealogy, our stories can start inspiring moving forward, and really the creation of what Mālia started to introduce, our mo'o methodology.
Yeah, and so I talked a little bit about our mo'o approach. So this is the approach laid out. It really comes in 4 phases. The first one, as I mentioned, with the oli by Auntie Edith Kanaka Ole, is mo'o ku'auhau. So that's the red box here. And mo'o ku'auhau is where we start all of our projects, from Kumulipo to what our ancestors said about that place, whether through song and chant, anything published about the place, just any kind of knowledge that we can learn about place from past generations. And so that's a lineage of generations of knowledge. So in every project that we do, we always start off with the mo'o ku'auhau of that place. And then the second is the mo'olelo. We take that mo'o ku'auhau into community, and we want to learn what their stories are, because people are shaped by their places. And we know that, as designers coming in, that we often get a very specific lens, but we don't always have the lens of the people of that place. So we then take the mo'o ku'auhau into that community or that place with those stakeholders, and we start to collect their mo'olelo, or their stories. And mo'olelo is a lineage of generations of tales. And some of their stories are passed down generation to generation. Some of them are through experience of them living and raising their families there. Some of them are places that they're going to work, that they work and they're vested in that way there. So then we have a rich collection from the genealogy to the stories. And then in the blue, mo'oka'i, that's where we really start our planning. So that's when Rob will start to design. That's when we'll actually start writing the book. So the mo'oka'i represents the journey. And we think about it in the way that that a navigator would approach the ocean when they were sailing across the sea, in that you start to really chart out your journey that your canoe is going to take. And it's a little bit fluid at first, and then it becomes over time more and more structural. And then the last phase, which is really important to us, is the mo'ovaivai phase. And this phase is really important to the planning process, because lots of times what we found is we would do great work with the genealogy, we would meet with community, and then we would say, for example, build a hotel or a resort. And then the planning team, us, would go away, and they would come in and reimagine and start to create new stories that weren't even relevant to that place, had no connection to the people of that place, but they thought was a cool, stories and meaning for the resort. So the mo'ovaivai is a very specific part of our process, so that we can make sure that when the planning team goes away, when the space is built out and the operational team comes in, that there are practices that will live there because of the work that we did. So mo'ovaivai is a lineage of generations of valued practices. And we're going to show you in the next handful of slides of how this comes to life in real projects.
I wanted to start with this only because in our work, it's probably one of the most significant projects that I've been involved in personally. It is a house of language, right? It's a haleolelo for the College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. This building had an opportunity for us to express all these elements of genealogy and stories and journeys and values. As we go through and you see the structure itself, on the left, we talked about this kind of place of origin or gathering, the piko, if you will, in Hawaiian terms, the umbilical cord, being the center of our activities. In any house of language, it's important to listen first, right? So the idea of these extrusions coming off the side of the building speak to the idea of listening and your ears being a conduit for language. As we come around the building on the bottom right, you see the waha, the mouth. If you are going to speak language, then it needs to be spoken, and this big kind of opening vestibule is one that directs itself to the rest of the University of Hawaii at Hilo campus. There's a great story that kind of guided us of one of our princesses, Ruth Ke'elikolani, that one of our mountains, or mauna, started to erupt, and the eruption was coming into Hilo town, and Hilo town was in peril. And our ali'i, as the legend goes, went out and greeted the eruption with a red scarf and laid down this red scarf to stop the lava flow and to preserve Hilo town. So the undulating forms, the red roof, the structure of how lava moves was all inspirational in the design of this structure. I introduced this because I do believe when we're designing for cultural spaces, in some ways it's easy, right, to influence yourself with culture and cultural thinking. As we went into the space, right, we have these traditional Hawaiian volumes inspired by places that we used to gather, but in contemporary ways, right, laid out for lecturing formats. We have simple circulation spaces that are otherwise corridors, but within our corridors, we start to tell the stories of our people. The legend of this, of stopping the lava flow is located through the corridor on the top right image. The idea of Papa and Wakea on the left in the stair corridor that connects all our students is told on a daily basis. we have these opportunities, but when we deal with hospitality or even ways other than our cultural places, it becomes more difficult. So we wanted to just share a few examples on how we deal in hospitality. In the idea of mo'okuauhau or genealogy, we'll just start in Waikiki. It's probably the most known hospitality destination we have here in Hawaii. It has, many wonderful stories in its history from our ancestors through modern day. There are great stories, but there's also a lot of ill that came through this period of time and the kind of juxtaposition between preserving our places and visitor industry. We find ourselves smack dab in the middle of that. And the way we find balance in the work that we do is by trying to understand and honor place as much as possible.
So in this visual image, what you can see is Waikiki as we know it today, but overlaid and actually brought forth is all of the traditional waterways of the area in blue and all of the traditional place names on top of that. Oftentimes in Hawaii, when development took place, right, developers just took out whatever was on the land and replaced everything. And this included our language. And so many of these place names, in fact, I would say all of these place names, as somebody that went to Waikiki often as a child, were not place names that we grew up knowing. We didn't know these place names anymore. We didn't have a relationship with these places, like how they are pictured here. So part of our responsibility in the projects that we do is to start to honor again the cultural assets, if you will, of place. And in order to do that, we do this process of mapping where we really overlay the cultural assets over the contemporary spaces in which we're planning so that we know exactly what existed yesterday and today. And then we can think about what needs to manifest there tomorrow. And when you think about tomorrow's ahupua'a, like Rob talked about, without this information, right, without the nana I mua, nana I hope proverb, we can't properly plan for the next 10 generations. So this is imperative to all of the work that we do. And also I wanted to just point out that the water is just as critical, right? Because water, we live in an island ecosystem here in Hawaii. Water is a critical asset of every community. And really, Hawaiians always developed in and around waterways and water. So understanding where the water resources are very important to us.
Today in our journey, we're just going to hone in on two developments in two areas, one known as Kalua o Kau and the other known as Helamoa. Through this process, we've spent a lot of time in our research in genealogy. We do that in Western terms, where we read and research and go to our resources like library and online institutions. But we also do that from a cultural perspective as well, where we reach out to our kupuna or cultural practitioners to help influence. Oftentimes, the first product that we put out and we take to our cultural practitioners and descendants from these areas are critiqued heavily by, no, that's not the way it was, or this is how you should do. And we humbly take their influence in crafting this because it's not for us, right? It's for them and how we move forward. The next phase in our process is mo'olelo. So as Mālia described, as we take our understanding of the genealogy back out to our people and our communities, we want to hear the stories that guide, and a few stories that guided these two developments in Waikiki.
So one of the developments is on an area called Kalua o Kau. And Kalua o Kau, like I mentioned before, was a place name that we no longer remembered in my generation. And so part of the work that we did was to bring Kalua o Kau back into modern existence. So now that my children go to this place, they know it as Kalu'okau again. And with that, really highlighting the Apuakehau stream that flowed from the top of Manoa Valley in Waiakiapua all the way down to the shoreline in Waikiki. Kalu'okau is really the heartbeat of Waikiki, if you will. It's at the center of the little peninsula that we know of as Waikiki. And it had lacked in my childhood and my growing up a lot of reinvestment in that space. It had once been the heyday of tourism and hospitality, and then just kind of lacked reinvestment and care. And so we had an incredible opportunity to come back into Kalu'okau and start to tell the stories again of this place. And Kalu'okau literally means the pit of Kau. And Kau, we were able to work with a Hawaiian navigator that just passed away, actually a Po navigator from Hilo as well, had Babayan, in really understanding what Kau meant, because Kau was a star line, constellation in the sky. And he helped us, came into the space in early planning phases and helped us to understand how this place got its name and the relevance of the star constellation place. This was a place that was owned, that was stewarded by a king, Lunalilo, and he bequeathed it to his friend, Queen Emma, who then makes her life here at Kalu'okau. Many of her plants and gardens and springs were here. She did a lot of writing of mele and song here. And so it was this place with this deep connection to our genealogy as Hawaiian people, but those stories weren't being told anymore. In fact, nobody that would go to this place, which is known as the International Marketplace, would ever know that Queen Emma had ever spent any time here on this land. They would not know that Lunalilo was a steward of the land, and they did not know that Kalu'okau was the place that this land carried for generations and generations.
I'll jump to Helamoa, which is geographically like within blocks of Kalu'okau in today's contemporary framework of kind of street grids and parcels. But here too, the name forgotten, replaced by just this overall description of Waikiki. The history of Kalu'okau is different than Helamoa, that's different than Kalia, that's different than Ulunio or Hamo, and our work tried to start to differentiate and highlight those ideas. Helamoa comes from this story of a phantom rooster that flew from a valley up in the mountains and landed at a chief, Kakuiewa's feet, and started to scratch. This chief saw this as a sign and instructed his men to plant a coconut. And from that coconut became the first coconut tree of this area known as Helamoa. Later, as the legend continues, this grove of coconut trees in its heyday was said to have numbered over 10,000 coconut trees and known as the Royal Grove of Helamoa. Helamoa has a long and storied history when King Kamehameha, our first kind of united leader of the Hawaiian Islands, landed on Oahu in his quest to unite the islands, created the first kingdom of Hawaii here at Helamoa within this Royal Grove, and had since then passed his lineage of these lands to Princess Pauahi Bishop, who now, through her trust, has established a school to teach Hawaiian people. So the story continues till today, and the inspiration of this place, Helamoa, the Grove of Waikiki. As we move through this process, these genealogy and stories then take shape in shaping architecture. We call it a journey, and I see it as a process of guiding people through experiential spaces. Form is one, program is important, but how one navigates through these spaces and kind of experiences is more of what our interest lies. Malia began talking about the international marketplace, and this is where tiny bubbles and, that kind of kishi tiki culture that became kind of the heyday of the 60s and 70s Hawaiian tourism renaissance began. Lots of beautiful memories from this time. And as we started to look to reinvent this space, we wanted to celebrate that, but also go back and speak to Kaluokao, speak of Queen Emma's time here, and still make it a contemporary commercial space. As we began that process, we thought of these three time periods: one of Kaluokao pre-contact, Western contact, where it was a Hawaiian place; two of when it was of its heyday and of Queen Emma's time; and three as it was international marketplace in Don Ho, and this idea of kind of Hawaiian tourism began. So those three spots created itself into three courtyards through the project: the Mauka, Queen's Court, and Banyan Court. The Mauka Court really starts to express this idea of the place of origin, of where our rains come and how they start to begin this flow of water. So the light fixtures through this kind of infinity oculus represents our rains coming down. Much like other native people, we have dozens of names for the types of rains that come through our place and time. This waterfall that exists in the Mauka section of Waikiki is called Waiakeakua, literally the water of the gods. And as that then comes through, and you can start to see it on the right side, this kind of stream of waterfall begins the pathway for the stream known as Apua Kehau.
I think also an important thing to point out was that the international marketplace was, in its previous design, was closed off so that you couldn't see the Mauka area. And so that Mauka court that Rob just showed really opened up that space to the Ahupua'a and to the valley that it was connected to. The second space and the second theme of the new international marketplace was really honoring the Queen. And as I mentioned, the Queen didn't have a voice there on this space. And she's just an incredible heroine of our people. I'm definitely a huge Queen Emma fan and draw a lot of inspiration from her and the work that she did in her life. But she lost her husband and her son at a very young age. She went on to be a carrier of our people through culture, through writing, and she ran for political office. She carried on all of the traditional, the traditions of our ancestors, and was able to do it in a way that was very relevant in the time period in which she was living in. So this courtyard was really an honorific space for her. We knew that she had to have a big voice here moving forward. So it's the largest of the three courtyards. It's a gathering place because we felt if any stories needed to be told in the genealogy of the international marketplace, people had to come to know Queen Emma. And they had to know her name, the name of her husband, King Kamehameha IV, the name of her keiki, Prince Albert, and they had to begin to have this relationship again with this beautiful woman from our genealogy. It has lilies that were her favorite flower that she grew there on property. It has gardens type spaces around the courtyard, honoring that space. There's beautiful statues of the Queen and the King and the Prince. And then it's kind of also the centerpiece of the area. So people gather here to listen to music and different activities that they have at the international marketplace. But every night at sunset, they have, and it's free, anybody can come, they tell the story of Queen Emma. And so when I talked about Mo'ovaivai earlier, like what are the practices of this place when we go away? So that's one of the Mo'ovaivai pieces that lives on here at the International Marketplace is that every night at sunset, which differs, the story of Queen Emma will be told. And it's told through hula, it's told through oli, dance, chant, storytelling. And it's actually a very beautiful show that everybody can come and see. And so forevermore at the International Marketplace in Kalua'okau, the story of Queen Emma will be carried on. It now has a legacy. There's an architectural feature too at the top of the screen. Sorry, Rob. And it's kind of a walking pool where children can walk in. But I just wanted to point it out because it's really important. You see the little boy splashing in it. It's kind of like a splash pad. But this has actually the constellation of Kau. So as I mentioned earlier, the name of this place is Kalua'okau. So children can now come and walk the constellation, the star line, and see Kau. They may not know what it is. There's educational signage everywhere, but they just get to experience it. So consciously and unconsciously throughout this space, right, our responsibility was to bring, again, land and man closer together. So whether they are conscious of what they're actually splashing in or not, the relationship between us and our place is getting deeper and deeper. And the last courtyard was the one closest to the ocean, on the Makai side, the ocean side. And this was the Banyan courtyard. These big banyan trees that you see in the images were saved in the design process. Rob and an amazing team of designers were able to actually save the trees in place. There was over 1 million data points taken in order to do this and to be able to design in and around the trees. But the trees were planted in the 1920s by the McFarland family. So they had their own genealogy here in this place as well. So it was really important to us to honor them. And they're just beautiful. They're beautiful design features that exist here. You can see in the central picture, there is a tree house. And that tree house is an honoring of Don the Beachcomber, who was part of the development of the Kitchi culture, but all of the Hawaiian music that really came out of this first period of Hawaiian hospitality. And, you know, the genealogy of tourism in Hawaii was that post-war, there was a need to fill that space. And so they really filled it with hospitality and starting what is now known as our tourism market, which is our biggest industry in Hawaii. And they did that by bringing people into Waikiki. And so this place, this courtyard honors all of that history and that genealogy. There's also a statue in this courtyard of Don Ho, who's probably one of the most famous Hawaiian musicians and most famous musician of this era, really. Rob mentioned Tiny Bubbles, one of his most famous songs, but he really wrote and sang a lot of music. And on any given night, you could come to Waikiki and hear him sing, even though he was an international phenomenon. And from this place was a radio show that could actually be tuned into from around the nation, from around the United States, and Hawaiian music could be heard. So this courtyard really represents that time and that place. So although from a Hawaiian and an Indigenous perspective, you may think, well, why would we want to honor this time period that really ignored kind of some critical elements like Queen Emma, like Kalua'okau? But actually, from an Indigenous perspective, it's important for us to honor the entire genealogy of the space. And although this kind of kitschy Waikiki culture that sometimes is seen as exploitative to our culture, it's become that way. It wasn't always like that. When tourism started, there was a lot of Hawaiians that had agency in the industry and were designing the experiences for tourists, were the guides for tourists that came to Hawaii, were the musicians. And so we really wanted to honor that time period and that place and show how these things could actually live together in a continuous genealogy.
The Helemoa story of the Royal Grove really kind of is the story that continues with probably one of Hawaii's most famous hotels, the Pink Palace of the Pacific, known as the Rural Hawaiian. I have had the chance to design probably over 24 hotels throughout my career, but I put this down as one of the most special moments, being able to participate in this hotel. It's nearly 100 years old. It is called the Pink Palace of the Pacific, and known as well as Diamond Head here is in Waikiki. But over time and through the war period, and since that, the kind of grandeur had gone away. So we called this the restoration of the royal grounds, not just the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, but the restoration of these royal grounds that our ali'i had come from in days gone by. To restore the stature of this place and the pageantry of Hawaiian hospitality through this period of time. To take spaces that were otherwise closed in with shops and not able to experience the exterior, and open these spaces back up to make these wonderful Hawaiian type connections from indoor to outdoor spaces. And to include the modern amenities that many of our people, as we travel, kind of experience. So these kind of luxury type spaces. That journey transitions into our final phase, this idea of values and practices. And really, as Malia has kind of alluded to through this, the piece that we take away the most pleasure. A piece of architecture might win an award, and we're very happy of those types of things. Malia has created and authored a book on the international marketplace that has won many awards. But really, it's these kind of special moments and special stories that perpetuate through time that we'd like to end with today.
Yeah, and so here you can see some of the mo'owaiwai pieces at the international marketplace and some of the places that we're extremely proud of. I'll start with the picture in the center on the top, where it has an elevator shaft. And in that elevator shaft, right, it's just an elevator. You go up and down, you get to go to different floors. But we have all of the words of Queen Emma's lyrics, a Mauna Kea Kalani. So it was a song written about her journey to Mauna Kea, her connection to Hawaii Island. And when she ran to become the queen of Hawaii, she took a traditional journey up to the highest spot in Hawaii, which is Mauna Kea. And it was a spiritual journey for her. And the song really documents her journey. So as you're riding up in the elevator, right, the idea is you're surrounded with her journey to Mauna Kea as well. And then her beautiful statue below that just depicts her in all her grandeur as a mana wahine, as a powerful woman, as an ali'i, as a mother, as a heroine of her people. In the center, you see a statue of Danho. And these things aren't easy, you know. Now that they're built, it's awesome to see them and they're awesome. But things like building a statue of somebody, Danho, he has an entire family. He has an entire trust and a board that have very different ideas. And part of the work that we had to do in the development of this was to bring those different fractions around his genealogy together to have some kind of consensus around what could possibly be built. And it was a very painful process to bring, you know, seemingly completely different ideals together to honor him. And many times it got scratched. It actually was the last element that was built in the international marketplace way after the opening because of all of the time that it took to get everybody to come to the table. But that's also the awesome part about genealogy, right? Is that if you bring genealogy back to place and back to stories, that people have to come to the conversation and have important dialogue and come to some consensus around how they want their story to be told in perpetuity. And the picture below it is the Apuake House stream, and it flows from the top of the international marketplace to the bottom as it traditionally once will. So you can meander around the entire ground level of the international marketplace right next to the Apuake House stream. And it reminds us, right, that water is critical. It's the most important asset that we have as island people, and that we have a responsibility to make sure that it's showcased and taken care of well. I mentioned the splash pad before, but really you can kind of see the star constellation now in there, and it's in the Queen Emma Court, right? The traditional place name of that place and connected to Queen Emma. And it's a place of learning for our children today. And then the last picture above shows a tower element. You can see it going all the way up. And this, was another thing that culturally we had many discussions around whether or not that gets built. And I had strong reservations around it getting built because it has like a torch thing inside. And for me, I felt like it was really honorific of Kalakaua, and Queen Emma and Kalakaua, in our history were often running against each other politically and had different ideals. And I didn't necessarily want that lamaku on Emma's space. But the awesome part about it is like when you get a lot of Hawaiian practitioners around the table, you can have these creative conversations that pull and push and pull and push until the final product is born. And it just looks amazing and is amazing. But lots of blood, sweat, and tears goes into it behind the scenes. Here's a picture of the splash pad again, Koluoko.
And same with the Rural Hawaiian on an architectural and kind of hospitality aspect. We were able to do so much restoration of space to really bring it back to its grandeur. It had fallen off the world's list of best hotels. And following our closure and reinvention, it has continuously since 2009 been within the top 100 hotels in the world. We were able to reintroduce a series of kind of historic elements back to place. We tell stories. And the most amazing story that we'll end with today, to me, as much as this has a lot of my personal kind of professional story intertwined, the Royal Grove of Helamoa still exists. That scratching of the surface at our ali'i's foot that started to plant that first coconut tree still exists today. There were trees in this courtyard that were over 100 years old. These trees definitely were the descendants of the Royal Grove of Helamoa, probably 7 generations past. If anyone knows, in Hawaii, as you go through our resort environments, you don't see a single coconut on a coconut tree. So people don't even know that they're coconut trees anymore. They call them palms. But in our homes, we had plenty of coconuts on our trees, but in resort environments, not. Because when they fall, right, and hit somebody in the head, it could be fatal. So before, as the coconuts start to come up, they're taken off as normal practice. Well, the maintenance people for over 50 years at the Rural Hawaiian had cut these coconuts down, but had propagated them in a small garden in the back. And when time came by, they would replant one of these coconut trees. So the perpetuation of the Rural Hawaiian grove, the 10,000 Grove of Helamoa, exists. Well, these 100-year-old trees needed to go away. They were going to fall. And we had to cut trees down. And as in many traditional cultures, cutting of trees can be a sensitive and emotional kind of experience. What we did, though, is we invited pahu makers, Native Hawaiian drum makers, to come and take the trunks of these trees. So we had Native Hawaiian drum makers from across the state come and take these stumps back, so none of them had to go into landfill or to be destroyed. And the most wonderful story, unbeknownst to us, right, that when we had reopened these, we had these droves, not asked, but droves of Hawaiian pahu makers that came back and gave back pahu drums to the place. So not only does the Royal Grove exist today by the repropagation of the coconut trees, but it exists in traditional ways through traditional practices and this idea of hospitality, giving back and offering exists in its marketplace. We have many more examples. We probably talked for too long already, but wanted to share some of the work that inspires us as we continue to try and find right ways to influence our hospitality industry with strong Hawaiian principles and thinking. Mahalo.
I think too, we just wanted to end and just share with you our family of companies. We have been able to really take this thinking and to have it spread throughout the architecture firm, through the strategy firm, and now through our archaeology firm. And those are three critical spaces in which intersect development in Hawaii. And although we can't slow it down, we can make sure that Native Hawaiians are at the table. And that's the very impetus of starting these firms and having these firms. And then also our responsibility to really take care of this place too and steward this place. So we all run Hawaiian businesses, and therefore we run them on Hawaiian business models where we give back heavily to community. And so Malama Kipuka and Malama Ahupua'a are two of the nonprofit arms of our organizations that continue to create spaces, public spaces, if you will, for people to enjoy that also shares the history and genealogy of our place here in Hawaii.
Mahalo. Mahalo to both of you. It was an amazing and very full presentation. And one of the things that I just kind of want to remind our attendees is that what the two of you and all those associated with you special for us in Hawaii is taking places that had kind of gone away from the authentic storytelling, and now you've allowed them to connect back, right? Connect back to the authentic stories of the place, but still retain the modern luxuries, the modern technologies of today. And so that is, for me personally, the specialness of what the two of you and your companies and your nonprofits do is not only, of course, retaining our culture, putting our culture at the forefront, our Hawaiian culture, our stories, our place names, our olelo, our language, and our people, but also reminding everybody that our Hawaiian people, like many indigenous people, were very innovative, right? And that they always were looking at how you can pivot, how you can improve things. And that is not something that was put upon us. It's something that we do naturally. And so to be able to, with these examples that both of you so beautifully presented, the Royal Hawaiian Shopping Center, the International Marketplace, and Amanui, right, that beautiful book, you can see that you took that specialness and made sure it just came through. So I just want to mahalo both of you for not only the presentation, but for the work that both of you do. Yeah, mahalo. I want to just go straight to the first question that came up, and I want to remind all the attendees, please, at this time, put questions if you want. If not, Hiʻilani is going to talk too much. So thank you for sharing. This is from Chuck Lennox. He says, thank you for sharing such a wonderful cultural background of these special places. Is this background accessible to the typical visitor? How would they get to know the cultural stories behind the design? And he says, you've done a wonderful job of celebrating culture in design.
Yeah, I would say that it's really, like all stories, it's like an onion. There's so many levels to every story. And many of the stories are accessible. Like, for example, in the international marketplace, there's cultural signage throughout the international marketplace that you can actually go on a cultural journey through that place and learn about each of the different special things. They also use technology like QR codes to be able to allow you to access the story, you know, on your phone as well. And it's in both Hawaiian and English. So a celebration of language there as well. But it's like everything, people will take away different layers of the story. Some people will spend hours there and hours and learn all about it. Some people will walk through and just enjoy the aesthetic beauty of that space. And so the stories are accessible. It just depends, you know, how much you want to invest in your experience there. And I think we did that a little bit on purpose, is that, you know, not all stories are for everyone. There's one place in the international marketplace that is, if you walk by it, and you're going to know now because I'm going to share it with you, but it's not written about, published about, there's no sign, but it's just a black wall, and it's on the first level, prime real estate. And that is the Iwi Kupuna room. That's the room that was built and designed for the lineal and cultural descendants of that place, and for all of the bones that were in that area. And we went through a lot of ceremony and a lot of intense engagement with lineal and cultural descendants of that place on how best to honor these kupuna, these ancestors that are here in that place. And we really raised the bar too, because this is the first time ever in Hawaii that prime real estate was given up for Iwi kupuna to be buried in place, which was a preference of the lineal and cultural descendants. So that story, that mo'olelo, if you will, is not for everyone. It's for the ancestors. It's for us to honor the ancestors of that place, but really for the family members that continue to do that honoring today. So, you know, the stories are many and diverse and deep, and everybody takes away something a little bit different from their experience.
Just add on to that, just one story that I think many would relate to. You know, many of our clients are internationally based. As you would imagine, right? We have real estate funds and very influential types of owners and developers. And quite frankly, from time to time, we have clients that understand that Hawaiian culture is important because they want their place to do well. But aside from that, may not have much interest in expressing it. And that's where we come in, right? Like we push back, we fight to get in, and sometimes we just hide the stories. We get them in whether they want it or not through our architectural kind of way, so that if you want to go deep, almost every one of our spaces, we can take you through a deep journey.
Beautiful. Yeah, the international marketplace has become really one of my favorite places in Waikiki. There's actually a question I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit, just because somebody asked about Kama'aina discount. And I just wanted to tell you that international marketplace is the most affordable place to park in Waikiki today. Partly because there's really awesome things like halo halo and ice cream, things that you can go get that is really not expensive like you would find in Waikiki, and you do that and it's validated too. So anyway, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I know because I utilize that parking.
Yep. 4 hours. 4 hours.
And one of the things that's important to point out is that Hawaiians have had mixed feelings about Waikiki, right? For the last several generations. Lots of Hawaiians from the community I live in don't want to go to Waikiki at all, right? So Rob and I knew, right? Like, why are locals going to come? Why would they come to Waikiki? Well, they need parking, right? There's nowhere to park in Waikiki. So if you go to the international, and it may seem silly, like it's just a parking lot, but if you go there, there's tons of stalls and they're really big, so they can fit everybody's trucks. And you can need to, right? But we knew that was one of the barriers for Native Hawaiians coming into Waikiki, was not having a place to park. That's funny you brought that up.
No, I think it's a really important point of your guys' design, is that you were designing the parking especially for locals to fit their big cars, to not worry about parking in these tiny places. And the parking is really lit, right? It's open. That's another thing that I love. But let's move on to the next question. From Ilihia Gaisan, what advice do you have for Native peoples looking to incorporate their storytelling into their place design without being kitschy?
Nico?
Did you guys hear it?
Yeah. Aloha brother, long time. Thank you for the question. It's a struggle, right? It's a struggle to find the right story and how to tell them. Within our community, like I would imagine in many indigenous communities, there's ends of spectrums. And oftentimes our well-intentioned efforts to share stories might be seen as, in some cases exploitive or inappropriate. So we struggle and wrestle with that on a continuous basis. And I think the dialogue that we have internally helps us find where our grounding point is. I think the fact that we get influences from clients and influences from communities that we try to navigate a sensitive middle ground for has helped. And I think, to our benefit, being able to have done this now for several decades, the fact that we have success stories more than stories of non-success, right, gives us some standing to allow us to explore where some others might not be able to. But it is probably one of the most, I don't say this to our architecture clients, but the architecture part is the easy part in my mind. Coming up with the story of how we develop form. It's trying to sensitively tell the right cultural story that becomes the most difficult part.
Yeah, I mean, I can just add, I would just say, for me, I always start off in mo'oku'auhau. I think that is a grounding element that anybody can take and kind of apply to any kind of design project. And the awesome part about our ancestors is that they'll tell you if you're headed in the wrong direction, because it takes on a mana or a spirit of its own. And, part of our responsibility is to just be listening to that and to take cues from them as well.
Mahalo. There's a couple of questions that is surrounding your process, the mo'o storyline. So one is from Rachel Moreno, and she's talking about how wonderful your information is, and she would like to look at it to develop her future programming offering. She's actually a Tlingit in Southeast Alaska. She's also a board member of AIANTA. So she wanted you to go back and explain the 4 colored aspects of place. She missed it, but I was actually thinking, Rob, that it is on your website, isn't it?
Yes, on both of our websites, and I'm not quite sure how we interact moving forward, but I would welcome anybody to kind of reach out to me or Mālia, and we'd be more than willing to kind of share and hear from you on what you're doing in your kind of communities. I think the more we share information and ways of approach, the better we all can be in kind of dealing with these issues moving forward.
Are there any articles, or is it? I think it's also on your website. Both of your websites, right? Articles that have been published about your process.
I think there's, not our entire process. I think our website is probably the best place to learn about the process. But there have been articles that highlight some of the design work and some of the details of the different projects.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of presentations as well. We start every presentation, every one, the same way we began this presentation. So, and oftentimes we'll do it 20 times for our clients. You know, I mean, we may be way down in the design process, and we'll bring them back to Aina Kanaka just so that they understand and remember where we've begun and where our journey is continuing to. So, yeah, we can share some of those aspects as well.
Where is the book? And if you can say the name of the book again, share the name of the book, and where is the book available for purchase?
Yeah, it's actually not available for purchase. It's we actually are in the process of pricing reprints because it's there's no more copies of it right now. So hopefully we'll get those back into circulation soon. But Hiʻilani, we can share a couple with you that maybe can be resources for the entire organization somehow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would
we
say
can
too,
talk
there's
about
two
that.
books, right? There's the International Marketplace book, which Mālia authored, and I really think that this is a jewel. This book was established initially as part of the federal process of going through the Historic Preservation Act, so that we had to document the architectural elements that were being replaced by the new development. But we saw this, and Mālia spearheaded it as an opportunity really to do more than just a document that's going to sit in a drawer somewhere in the State Historic Preservation Division, and highlight that with stories. And this is an incredible way of reaching out to community, and many of the stories are told. So we can share some of this. Amanui, I think, is still available on Amazon. I know that we have limited prints, and through the Edith Kanakaole Foundation, we were able to also offer this book in Olelo, Hawaii, everything in Olelo, Hawaii, even if you can see, right, the architectural footprints of the building that are translated into Olelo, Hawaii. And while this might be standard in some cultures, think of Asia, right? You would see Japanese floor plans written in Japanese language. This is, to my knowledge, hasn't been done in Hawaiian times, and I'm not sure is a practice done in other indigenous cultures, but that too, I think, has limited runs.
I think an interesting side story too to the International Marketplace book is that Rob said it so very eloquently, but actually the architectural piece that needed to have a full historical report on was a mechanical garage door. And the mechanical garage door that the Hawaii Historic Preservation Department, right, deemed historic. And for us as Indigenous people, we're like, okay, awesome. But actually, there's much more to the history that needs to be told and shared. And so we took that little opening and we blew that window open. And that's kind of also part of our responsibility as stewards, is that we're always pushing for more. And oftentimes, I don't know if Rob wants to talk about this, projects, right? We're dealing with big commercial developers from around the United States that we have to walk away from the project. We're like, okay, no, we can't stand by and watch you do this. We've already shared with you. And many times we're able to reconcile and ho'oponopono that, but we have to be, you know, as the Indigenous voice, have to really be able to stand on our own and say, okay, Powell, we're done for now, you know, until you guys come back to a space that makes sense for us. So it's interesting that something like a mechanical garage door can trigger the entire genealogy of Kalua Okau. And similar to the Manui book, in instilling Hawaiian architecture for the first time in Hawaii, since our kupuna, since our kuhi puone were shaping space and land, right? So we're opening up these spaces, but there's so much more work that needs to be done in these spaces as well.
Mahalo. Yes, definitely. That second book I got as a gift when I got to do a presentation to the staff at the International Marketplace, and I just fell in love with that book. So mahalo for making sure that others know about it. One of the things is it's a really good example, for other Native peoples that you can have multiple projects and multiple momi, right, pearls that can come out of just even the architecture, the cultural story, all of that. That's just, it's so beautiful. Mahalo for that answer. We're gonna kind of wrap it down a little bit. So Dana Lee says, what is the size of your firm or firms, and what kinds of qualifications do your employees need to perform the work required? Ooh, that seems like a little bit long answer, yeah?
I like start. So qualifications, right? We are just looking for good creative thinkers. That's probably criteria number one, and this is highlighted by the fact that Mālia and ours relationship, how that existed. She shared with you her background, PhD in political science, and knowledge about cultural practices and language, nothing to do with architecture. But I saw her in community dealing with a very sensitive land transfer from the state of Hawaii to an organization here called the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, essentially a group that monitors and maintains Hawaiian existence, or Hawaiian, perpetuates Hawaiian people. I saw her dealing with that, and it's like, shucks, that's what we need. Our firm needs that ability to speak within our communities to all aspects of our communities. So we're trying to surround our group with as many creative thinkers with a diverse kind of backgrounds and responsibilities to deal with the issues that we have to deal with in contemporary kind of hospitality development. Architecture, we can find architects, but where are those thinkers that think the same way or can be additive to the way we think is super important to us. We're a firm of about 40. We never have gotten much bigger than that or much smaller than that. In Hawaii, there's firms that are in the hundreds. We find ourselves in a nice little niche where we can control what we'd like and work on the best and brightest that comes along. So we got to be enough to do that, but not so much that we need to feel that we need to take on more than we can or want to or can, from our principal standpoint, manage effectively moving forward.
I'll just add quickly to that. I know we're running out of time, but so Detail Hawaii, the strategy firm that we founded, was really a spinoff of WCIT Architecture. So what we found is that people were coming to Rob and I to do community engagement, communications, strategic planning, other type things, because they wanted the methodology. They wanted the approach that we had. So we saw it as a business opportunity to establish Detail Hawaii, which is now a strategy firm. And then I'll say too, our third company that we've launched in the last 5 years is Aina Archaeology. And that was really a strategic understanding that there weren't enough Hawaiians in archaeology. And in all disciplines in development, right, archaeology is the one that deals with our ancestors' bones. So we needed more Hawaiians in this space. And our archaeology firm is it's a very busy firm. And I will tell you that we can hire enough Hawaiian archaeologists still. So, part of what we've had to do in that firm was create an education program that takes students out of high school and takes them through what they need in order to be field technicians in the archaeology space. So we've had to create actual pipelines to get the talent that we need sometimes in that space, because that firm went from 2 people to 30 people overnight. And we had to bring in a lot of actual archaeologists that had from the continental US that had worked in other Native and Indigenous communities to work here in Hawaii, because we didn't have enough of that in that industry ourselves. So much of it is we're still building capacity too, to be able to, really disrupt mainstream Hawaii space with Hawaiian thinking.
And that's what we're trying to do with books like this, right? I mean, to hit the kiki when they're young, and if they can get engaged and see those little diagrams of, how a crab can shape a piece of architecture and inspire them, and also to tell our mathematicians and our doctors, right, our Native Hawaiian practitioners in all the professions, that there's ways to practice your professional capabilities with culture as a major component.
Beautiful. Well, this is the last question we have time for, and the question is: how do you think you can advocate that other architectural practitioners to approach working with Indigenous communities in this way?
Sorry,
repeat it one more time.
Start out. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Here. How do you think you can advocate that other architectural practitioners to approach working with Indigenous communities in, I guess, the same way? One of the things I want to point out, though, is that you can always contact Rob and Mālia. So, they work with many different organizations. They also don't only work with people or organizations in Hawaii. Yeah. So they're also available. And if they cannot, they can also direct you probably to people they work with and know as well. Yeah.
I just shared just a quick perspective from my place. I think we're kind of at a turning point here in Hawaii. There's been kind of some pretty inspirational identification movements of time that's happened in my lifetime. But I do think we're at a point in time where our community demands it. And how do you influence other firms or other people to do it? Well, the community has to stand up and say that it's important. And once that does, right, once that happens, and once the community says it isn't going to happen until you start making these things important, sometimes change won't happen, even with people like us and others who take great pride and responsibility in doing this. If somebody can get by from a financial perspective in doing it some way that doesn't, and what's the impetus, right, in some cases. So I think the community needs to demand it, and there needs to be more that are showcasing these types of ways, right? I know they're out there. I know you've had presentations with others that have showcased work, but yeah, I mean, it's got to come from community.
Yeah, I agree. That was well said.
There is one last question that I think you might be able to answer, is how to incorporate cultural design in like affordable housing kind of things, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the opportunity is that it can be, we would argue that it could be incorporated in everything that you do. I think the same approach and methodology works with affordable housing. We have done a lot of community work in terms of projects and building and housing, and we apply the same approach to it. The funding might be a little bit different. Lots of times Rob and I are called into community and are very happy to partner with the community to accomplish their vision. And in affordable housing projects, that house many of our people, it's just as important to have the richness of the mo'oku'auhau come throughout that project as well in that place.
Yeah,
I agree that the process is the same, and strategically looking how to express that through architecture and graphics in smart ways is crucial. So I mean, even like planning principles, orientation, inspiration of kind of connectivity to external cultural influences in place. We just finished one right down the road from us. It's affordable housing, micro units, 300 square feet, as small as we've ever seen here on Oahu. But we've got all sorts of cultural influence. Solomon Enos, the artist that we started out showcasing today, did a wonderful mural, just finished a few weeks ago, with deep and rich cultural stories assigned to it. This place was known for our migrant immigrant workers that had come into the sugarcane plantation days. My ethnicity, Malia's, Hiʻilani's, right? Ethnicities of Asian influences and Japanese and Chinese that make up this rich tapestry of what contemporary Hawaii is, as you know, we use the maps of those plantation camps as kind of the motif that we use for screen work. So there's tons of different ways. You just got to keep looking for them. You look for them, you'll find them, and think creatively. So I think we all can do that in our community.
Yes, that's a beautiful way actually to kind of conclude our presentation, because I also see folks as community connectors, making sure that our Native Hawaiian artisans, culture practitioners, and all of the people, right, their stories and what they can gift to projects come through. So I really, really want to make sure that we also make that point before we end. So with that, I want to say mahalo, mahalo, mahalo. Thank you so much to everybody for attending our presentation. I want to mahalo Mālia and Rob for such an amazing, amazing presentation. It really reminds us of how important our authentic storytelling is to be around us everywhere. And that when people come to visit our places, our homelands, that they should be immersed in it and surrounded by it, even if they don't realize it. Yes. So that with that, I want to say mahalo on behalf of AIANTA as well, being the Pacific, one of the Pacific board members at this time. We're just so honored to have this webinar series happening, and we hope that you folks attend the next one. A recording of this will be on the AIANTA website. Rob and Mālia will also be connecting it to their websites, and their contact information was posted by Sherry Bowman a couple of times throughout our presentation. So with that, mahalo to everybody and have a beautiful Po'alua Tuesday. In Hawaii, it's a beautiful day here on the west side of Oahu. I'm sure it's beautiful all over Oahu today. Mahalo. Aloha. Ahuiho until we meet again, because we never say goodbye. Aloha.
Mahalo.
Aloha. Aloha.